All right, what's up, guys? It's been a while. I'm excited to do a video. I have a really good article for y'all. Let's pop it up here, and it is from the Fort Worth, Texas Gazette, Thursday, April 30th, 1885. Texas Antiquities, Footprints of the Aboriginal Tribes of Texas, Some Interesting Discoveries, Unmistakable Evidence of the Existence of a Civilization Far in Advance of the Red Man, Relics of the Moundbuilders, thousands of years old, Skeletons of Gigantic Men. You knew it. You knew it. So, like these guys right here, they're brothers. Look, 7'8", this guy, 7'10", 7'11", and 7'11". Two of them almost 8 feet tall. Yeah, and there's a little shout out to Matagorda County in there, my home county. A lot of other counties with some very interesting discoveries. I wanted it to kind of correlate with another video that'll be coming out hopefully soon, but Camtasia keeps crashing because it's a very long video, and I'm trying to figure out how to make the video without Camtasia crashing. I'm doing it in segments and then putting it all together. It's a whole thing. But yeah, so just enjoy, and hopefully you'll have some more material coming out soon. It's taken a while to get back in the mix of things. I don't always want to record my face. So, and dadding, I can just blame it on my kid. I've been doing dad things, so it's his fault. All right, y'all have fun and enjoy. All right. This is a long one, so just bear with me. But if you're from Texas or you're very interested in Texas and its prehistory, it is worth it, let me tell you. Okay. When or in what year the present state of Texas first became inhabited, we are not informed. History does not record the year and tradition is silent. But certain it is that the state itself is not wanting in many evidences of its great antiquity. Those old monuments of earthworks extending along our coast as far as the Nueces River, and which dot the country in various places from the Sabine to the Rio Grande, and which time long since has nearly leveled with the surface of the earth, are but mute witnesses which inform us of inhabitants, of villagers who once dwelt here, and of the high state of civilization to which they had attained. The mounds and the monuments which this strange race of people have left behind them are acknowledged on all hands to be most hoary with age, so much so that Professor Alexander does not hesitate to attribute to some of those found in Texas even thousands of ages. I have seen them in great numbers myself, and I feel safe in saying that our state must have been inhabited in very ancient times by powerful and highly civilized people. If the Chinese race should be swept away, it would not leave behind its monuments equal in size and workmanship to those in Texas. What? In deep forests, in places far remote from the habitations and cultivated fields of white men, the traveler will sometimes find himself in the presence of massive ruins whose appearance indicate that they were first erected many centuries ago. Large forest trees several hundred years old are sometimes found growing amongst and on these ruins. Along the margin of the classic Salado and my own county, Bell, in several places we find abundant evidences of prior occupancy. In a horseshoe-like bend of this stream we may yet see traces of an old fortification of earthwork, which is without doubt the remains of this ancient race, the Moundbuilders, and from its terraced shape we infer that it was used by the natives as a place of worship and sacrifice, as well as a stronghold in time of war. Near the base of this remarkable structure we have been exhumed human bones, flint arrowheads, and potter's ware, the later very exquisite in workmanship and finish. In the lonely little valley which encircles this structure, we find the remains of an aqueduct several hundred yards in length, which several hundreds long, but man, the ones in southwest Arizona, in Arizona, they're like miles and miles and miles. In Red River County, in 3 separate places, and in Bowie County, in 1 or 2 places, the same silent evidences attest to this prior occupation. How many centuries ago, we can only conjecture. In them may also be found flint arrowheads, human bones, potter's ware, and other prehistoric relics. In the northwest part of Lampasas County, quite a number of mounds have been discovered. In 1876, Professor Alexander of Salado College opened a mound in Lampasas County. in which he made certain discoveries that, taken together with the form of the mound and the several relics found in the same, led him to the conclusion that it was the work of the Moundbuilders, and that too in very ancient times. This monument, as he informs us, was a truncated oval, the level on the top measuring 60 feet in length by 20 in width. From indications not necessarily to be mentioned here, Professor Alexander argues that the mound could not have been intended for burial purposes, but was evidently erected for the foundation of a building of some kind. In Coleman County, several important discoveries have been made, the most important and remarkable at a recent date, May 1884. The following letter from a regular correspondent to the Fort Worth Gazette gives the particulars of this discovery. We give it as it appeared in the Gazette, leaving the reader to draw his own conclusion. While we were yet in town, Coleman City, Mr. W. M. Babb reported to us the finding upon his ranch in this county of a huge skeleton, supposed to be that of a human being. The skeleton was examined by Dr. Brodniks and pronounced by him to be human. The leg bone from the knee to the foot measured 4 feet 8 inches and 36 inches around. The arm bone was 3 feet 1 inch from the elbow to the hand, and a rib was 4 feet and 1.5 inches long. This skeleton was found near a creek and was almost unearthed by the washing of the water. As soon as the waters are lower, the entire skeleton will be exhumed. Mr. Babb says the above figures are true, and being a reliable man, we publish them. This skeleton, judging from the parts already measured, must have been some 18 or 20 feet high. Led, through curiosity and a desire to learn more of the particulars of this strange and wonderful discovery, the writer addressed a letter to Dr. O. W. Brodniks relative to the discovery and promptly received the following answer. Cottonwood, Callahan County, Texas, August 18, 1884. Mr. James T. DeShields. Dear Sir, your letter of the 12th instant is at hand. The bones were found on the bayou or the pecan bayou. One bone of the foreleg from the knee down is 4 feet 8 inches long and 5 to 6 inches in diameter, and was perfect when taken out. One rib is 14 feet 1 inch long. One joint of the back or neck weighs 12 to 18 pounds. The water since has been over the bank so that we could not examine or look farther. The bones are about 12 feet below the surface. I will write you more about the same and some other matters of interest soon. Yours with respect, O. W. Brodniks, M.D. We will not make any comments or advance any theories on the above, but will continue the subject matter of this article, Aboriginal Antiquities of Texas, leaving the reader to advance his own theories respecting this discovery, which is without doubt a wonderful one, and will furnish a vast field for the ethnologist to explore. I love that right there, just this little part. They're going to read you the facts, and you make up your own idea, your own thoughts about it. And that's exactly what I'm doing. The authentic history of the Western Hemisphere only reaches back between 3 and 4 centuries, hence the term prehistoric, when applied to American antiquities, does not always imply that they correspond in age with the prehistoric remains of the Old World, whose history embraces thousands of years. But writers on American archaeologists do not, we believe, designate as prehistoric any memorials that are referable to the existing race of Aborigines, but only such as are believed to have belonged to races that have passed away, and which may be supposed to correspond in antiquity with many of the prehistoric relics of the other hemisphere. The prehistoric remains of the man and his arts found in the tumuli of the Mississippi Valley indicate that the country was once inhabited by a more civilized people than the red man. Tumuli is the mounds. Yet the former may not have preceded the later in the occupation of this continent, for the flint arrowheads found in innumerable localities throughout this state, and indeed throughout this continent, buried in some instances several feet beneath the surface and alluvium, attest the presence here of the red race untold ages before the advent of the palefaces. Mine's real pale right now. These tiny monuments of the American Aborigines are in fact more enduring than the pyramids of Egypt, and thousands of years hence they will continue to be turned up by the plow of the farmer, looking almost as fresh and untarnished as when they were first wrought from the pebbles in the early ages of human existence. Though the prehistoric people of America, or at any rate those of the Mississippi Valley, do not seem to have emerged from the stone cycle and therefore in common with our Aborigines probably pointed their weapons with stone, yet as we found no traces of their abodes in Texas, we may reasonably attribute the fabrication of the flint arrowheads which are so abundant here to the Indian race. In many frequent walks some years since along the beaches, the bays, and the inlets a few miles south of the Guadalupe River, I rarely failed to find a number of these aboriginal relics, especially immediately after the ebb of a very high tide. I have also found many about the bases of the sandy hillocks or dunes which have been heaped up by the winds in many places along our coast. I have occasionally found one large enough for the arrow of a Titan, but these are probably used for harpoons. Some of these arrows are very rudely wrought, while others, particularly a very small kind, are of a exquisite finish with a point as sharp as a lancet and the cutting edges finely and beautifully serrated. One can but wonder how they were wrought with the imperfect tools of the Indians. Most of the specimens collected by me had necks or shanks by which they were fitted into the shaft. A few, however, were without this appendage, but were either grooved or beveled on both sides of the base of the tongue. It is not improbable that other tribes occupied the littoral hunting grounds of the Karankawas, or, at any rate, at some period shared them conjointly with the later. The various tribes probably possessed various degrees of skill in the manufacture of flint weapons, hence the marked difference in design and finish among them. The earlier or later age in which they were wrought may also have had its influence. The flint pebbles from which these arrowheads were chipped were probably obtained from 30 to 40 miles inland, where they abound in several localities. All of the Indian tribes of Texas, when it was first colonized by Americans, used metallic arrowheads, which they had probably substituted for flint ones nearly a century before or not long after the establishment of the missions and military post of San Antonio and La Baja, where they doubtless obtained copper, brass, and iron, all of which metals they used for pointing their missiles. Fragments of earthen pottery are coextensive with the flint relics, and they bear evidence that our Aborigines were highly skilled in the ceramic art. The Indian dead usually receive very shallow sculpture. Often the Texas tribes did not bury their dead at all, but merely piled logs or stones upon the bodies, which were soon extracted with the flesh devoured by beasts of prey. The bones being thus left to the action of the elements rapidly decaying, hence the osseous remains of the Aborigines are rarely far inland, but in various places along the coast the winds have performed the rites of sepulture by blowing the sand upon the dead. At Ingleside in 1861, human bones were disinterred at two localities more than 100 yards apart from a depth of 8 feet, and later, in October 1867, a little Golgotha was discovered in a sandhill or dune near what is locally known as the False Live Oak in Refugio County. About a month after the discovery, Mr. J.H. Kuykendall of Rockport, Texas, visited the dune for the purpose of thoroughly investigating it. I went to the house of Mr. C., who resides within 100 paces of the place of skulls, and upon inquiring of Mrs. C., her husband not being at home, she informed me that a large quantity of human bones, including several skulls, had been exposed by a carving of the dune, but being much decayed, they broke to pieces, and falling and quickly dissolved in the base of the dune. Mr. C. added that the bones had all caved in and disappeared, but bade her little son Tommy, about 8 or 9 years of age, go with me and point out the spot where they had been found. When we got near the hill, Tommy exclaimed, Oh, how the sand has caved since I was here before. When we arrived at the spot, I looked up and beheld for 40 feet along the face of the steep slope from which the sand had slidden a number of human bones projecting at various angles. The skulls of three which were exposed looked like brown cobblestones. Tommy's squirrel-like agility enabled him to reach the skulls sooner than I, and in his eagerness to extract them from the sandbank, he broke two of the rotten ones in pieces. Tommy! God, get your ass back over here. But the third one, being in a better state of preservation, received no damage from the rather violent handling. Violent squirrel. This skull was of medium size and remarkably round. The others seemed similar in size and type. The teeth of all were well preserved and did not exhibit any appearance of having been faulty during the lifetime of the owners. None of the bones seemed to have belonged to persons above the average size, with the exception of one femur. Neither the vertebrae nor pelvic bones, the ribs, the something plates, nor the bones of the hands and feet were preserved. These human remains were from 5 to 7.5 feet beneath the surface of the ground and 10 or 12 feet above the level of the bay. After an interval of 6 weeks, this gentleman again visited the spot. About 2 feet of the hill had caved away since my first visit, says Mr. Kuykendall. But the bone deposit was still unexhausted, for I found 3 more skulls and several limb bones, all of which broke into fragments in extracting them from the compact sand. Aware of a custom among many Indian tribes to bury the arms of the dead with them, I was disappointed in not finding stone arrowheads in the cave sand, but my research for them was not thorough. There is no reason, however, to doubt that these are aboriginal remains, and very ancient ones too. They're in perfect state of preservation, in a kind of earth very conservative of organic substances alone warrants this conclusion, which is reinforced by an argument which I will have to state. These remains are found at the southern extremity of a sand ridge or dune about 2 miles in length from north to south, and varying in height from 20 to 40 or 50 feet, and which was evidently formed while the Gulf beat directly upon the shore of the mainland. But ever since the long sandy island extending parallel with our coast were heaped up by the action of the waves and currents of the sea, the only communication between the interior bays or lagoons has been through a few narrow channels called bayous. The consequence is that the sandy materials of which the dunes are formed, instead of reaching the shore of the mainland as in former ages, are now deposited on the Gulf side of the island and blown up by the east and south winds into billocks similar to but generally less elevated than those which were formerly heaped by the same agency upon the mainland. Now, on the assumption that these human remains, in accordance with the universal custom of North American savages, were only entered to the depth of 2 feet at most, several feet of sand must subsequently have been blown over to them to account for the depth at which they were found, and the sand for this purpose must have been transported to the adjacent beach by the currents of the Gulf. Hence we conclude that these remains were deposited in the dunes before the Gulf was cut off from the mainland by the formation of the chain of island barriers above mentioned. The length of time that has elapsed since that event occurred can only be conjectured, but it doubtless amounts to centuries. The sand ridge containing the osseous relics have been preserved from the wasting effects of the wind by the thickets of dwarf oak and sweet bay with which it is overgrown. Some of the live oak at its eastern base are of sufficient girth to indicate an age of 2 centuries. Other oaks of the same species a short distance south of the dunes and very near the bay are much greater antiquity. All these trees must have grown up since the Gulf retreated behind Matagorda Island, which at this point is about 8 miles distant from the mainland, from all of which it follows as highly probable that the human remains above described were inhumed at a period when the broad waves of the sea resounded along the shores of the mainland, and before the sail of a ship had gleamed on the Gulf of Mexico, or the foot of a civilized man had pressed the shores of the New World.